Hello everyone, Kristina Werner here. Welcome to another video for Assignment Says Stamp. Today I'm using contents from the August 2021 card kit, specifically this stencil. There have been a lot of amazing cards shared with all of you using the cute frog images in the stamp set, but I'm going to challenge myself to make 2 cards with just this stencil. I will use a greeting from the stamp set on my cards, but other than that, everything is the stencil. I've got 5 different colors of Simon ink, as well as these fingertip blender brushes. And I'm just pairing each color of blender brush with the inks I'm using. I'm going to start out by using dull pink ink, and I'm going to be using these little images that are meant to create lily pads for your frogs, but I'm going to use them as sort of just abstract flower shapes to create a fun pattern of overlapping shapes and blended colors. So in between each color, I just wipe off my stencil with a dry paper towel. It doesn't take the color off completely, but it takes it off enough that the colors won't mix too much. I've also placed my ink pads on top of the Positively Everything tool. It's like a silicone, almost sticky, paw-shaped tool, and it holds the ink pad in place so that I can get the ink on my blender without the pad moving around. So the other colors I'm using are Jellybean Green, Hot Mama, High Tide, and I think this is Sunshine. I could be wrong, but I just picked some really fun colors, and I'm filling in all these different areas, including using kind of like the half floral shape. I want the colors to be spread out all across this design and not have, any 2 shapes that are the same color side by side. So I'm just trying to fill in all of these gaps, but I'm also mindful of the fact that I want to add another layer of these images using gold embossing powder. So I did leave some gaps, and before I get to the gold embossing powder, I'm going to hit this with the heat tool to speed up the drying. Are ones that dry back and soften as they dry, and because of that, their drying time is just a little bit longer than other dye-based inks. So I did a test run before I even started adding my images in Versamark. I just wanted to put some gold embossing powder on the surface and make sure it shakes off completely before moving on. And sure enough, it did. So I'm going to prep my area with an anti-static powder tool, and then bring my Versamark ink pad in, and I'm using a mini round blending tool to transfer the Versamark ink over to my project. I'm using the same exact images on the stencil that I used before, and these are just going to build a layer of gold embossing powder and fill in those gaps. So I just blend that Versamark ink in from the edges, and then I can apply my gold embossing powder. I'm using gilded embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, and I'll tap that to shake off the excess and then hit that with my heat tool. And it just gives a really fun shine to different areas on my background. So I'm going to continue adding all of these little images with the Versamark, and in between each one I'm going to apply the embossing powder and heat set it. I did it this way so that I wouldn't have any Versamark transferring around my project or the powder being disturbed. So I did it in stages. I kept continuing adding all of these images on, filling in those gaps. Now this adds the most beautiful gold sheen to all the different areas. I really, really loved this particular idea, and I can't even see it as, flowers for lily pads anymore. It's transformed to this abstract, colorful pattern with gold accents. Now I added quite a bit of gold, but I did want some smaller areas. So I thought, I'm going to go get a pencil and use the eraser on the end to create dots. But then I couldn't find a pencil. I recently moved craft rooms and I couldn't find a pencil with an eraser on it. So I'm using the amazing stamp set that has 2 dots in it, 2 different sizes of dots. So I'm just going to stamp those. Now this is a slight I should say I'm stretching my rules a bit. It's no longer just the stencil, but I really wanted to bring in some dot shapes just to kind of complete this pattern and have little elements of gold over the entire area. And I added some little dots right on top of these flowers. I wanted the gold, but I didn't want to obscure the colorful shapes underneath. So there's my pattern. Isn't it great? I love that. It turned out so wonderful. So I'm going to take some dull pink cardstock. This is just a scrap I've had hanging around. And I'm going to stamp one of the greetings from the stamp set that's included in the kit. I'm going to stamp that in Versamark. So I'm putting it on the door of my MISTI and then prepping that area with an anti-static powder tool. Then I'm going to ink up my stamp with the Versamark and then stamp my greeting onto that pink cardstock. I love using Versamark for embossing because it stays sticky long enough that you don't have to rush or hurry when you're doing your embossing powder. So I'm using that same gilded embossing powder and then heat setting that with my heat tool. I then trimmed down this piece so that it had just a little bit of space on the outer edges. And then I adhered my stamped background onto a white card base using some dot runner adhesive from Simon. So I put that adhesive on all the edges and a few strips in the middle and then pressed this down onto a white card base. I also put some foam adhesive on the back of my greeting piece. And the foam adhesive I'm using is actually one that's included in the card kit. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the card kit to make shaker cards or, pop up those frogs. So that having that foam taping in the kit is awesome. But in my case, I just used it on the back of my greeting and then I placed it directly onto the front of my card. So that finishes my first card using the stencil. I'm now going to move on to another card using the stencil. The first thing I'm doing is cutting my cardstock to 3.5 by 5.5. It's the perfect dimensions for a 5x7 card with a nice wide border. I've taped down my paper to some grid paper so that it doesn't want to move. And then I'm using that top edge of the stencil. It's that cloud edge. And I'm blending those same exact colors coming off the top edge of the clouds. So this is going to give me sort of a rainbow cloud effect over the entire piece of white cardstock. One of the reasons why I like to use the fingertip blender brushes for this particular stencil is that there are a lot of images on the stencil. You get a lot of bang for your buck, but because of that, you don't want to use a huge blender brush that could possibly blend into those smaller areas and then you ruin your blending. You didn't see this because I did it off camera, but I did try this with a larger blender brush and unfortunately it picked up those flower shapes underneath. And that's when I realized, okay, go back to the fingertip blenders. Those are going to be the best choice for this particular technique. So I moved on to the other colors. I'm sort of going in rainbow order. So I went on to the dull pink and sunshine and then on to jellybean. And we're going to finish with a high tide, or I think it's high dive. I'm not entirely sure. I always give it the wrong name. But this one I'm blending up quite a bit farther up and away from the edge than I did the other ones because it's blending up into that white area. High dive, that's the color, high dive. So I'm now moving it to my MISTI tool and I'm going to take that same greeting that I used on the first card and I'm going to stamp it up in that white space using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is going to finish it off. You could actually make this design into a one-layer card if you wanted to, but I wanted mine on a slightly smaller cut area than my card and then have a big wide border on it. Cutting the soft navy cardstock that's included in the kit, cutting that down to a 5x7 card base, and then adhering my blended piece on top with that nice wide border. So here are my two cards for today using that stencil in very different ways. Both have ink blending, but on one I created a pattern and on the other I created a seam. I hope that gives you an idea for something a little bit different to do with the contents of the August 2021 card kit. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be back very soon with another video. Thanks for watching.